The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a game that changed the gaming franchise as we know it. And with such a landmark title and success at the 2017 Game Awards, it is a given that people can't wait for the successor to this open-air masterpiece. The expectations are sky high, and now we have just learned that Monolith Soft are recruiting technical artists, programmers, planners, designers, and a project manager to support the Zelda team with the Next Zelda Game. This hiring spree might hint at a new location for the Next Zelda Game, seeing that Monolith Soft supported the Zelda team with topographical level design of Hyrule for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
However, the tough reality is that developing a Zelda game that is of the ambition and scale as Breath of the Wild takes time. About 6 years from the ground up. So will the time until 2022 be filled with Zelda remasters, remakes, spin-offs, and less ambitious top-down titles? Or will we get another open-air adventure in say 2020 or 2021 thanks to reusing assets from Breath of the Wild? Hello everyone, and welcome to a rather special episode of the Next Zelda Game. Today we will go deep into the current situation of the Zelda franchise and how likely an asset reusing open-air Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel is. Since there is no doubt that the Zelda franchise has never been more valuable for Nintendo than right now. With Breath of the Wild as the best-selling Zelda game of all time, well-received expansions and DLC to said game, a number of successful spin-offs, and the grand comeback of top-down Zelda with A Link Between Worlds, Link's Awakening remake, and most recently, a top-down spin-off in the form of Cadence of Hyrule. 2019 stands in the sign of top-down Zelda, the downfall timeline, the hero of legend, and his influence. In fact, in the downfall timeline, every story since 1991's A Link to the Past has revolved around him or a Hyrule where he was most influential. This and the fact that Link's Awakening was a top-down Zelda, with a different story, setting, and premise than that of Hyrule, and is shorter than other quests, making it a perfect candidate for a remake. And to be fair, a remake of Link's Awakening would have been more than enough to satisfy our Zelda appetite. But then, boom, we get Legend of Zelda Cross Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, the first indie Zelda spin-off before Nintendo's ambitious remake. However, the number of top-down Zeldas also point to that we are likely not getting a new top-down Zelda for a while, which explains why we are getting the Link's Awakening remake this year.
That is 2019, but what about 2020? We see this one going one of two ways. Either Nintendo goes hard into this year with their greatest graphic-intensive IPs and partners, that will say Zelda, Bayonetta, 3D Mario, you name it, to show off the power of Nintendo Switch Pro, or they will take time and instead of just reusing assets, create a brand new ones, for a new Zelda experience unlike Breath of the Wild from a graphical standpoint for say 2022 or 2023 for being a swan song for the Nintendo Switch or a late game for the Nintendo Switch. That is probably not a very good idea, seeing that Skyward Sword and Majora's Mask, being late Zelda games, didn't sell that well. But we'll get back to the mid versus late Zelda game cycles. So late 2020, early 2021, or late 2022. And the first two options are only feasible if the Zelda team are currently reusing most of the Breath of the Wild assets, Majora's Mask style. This is because a brand new HD open-air Zelda from the ground up with a new engine, world, hero, NPCs and so on is a 5-year work cycle, as we learn from the development of Skyward Sword and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So what arguments are in favor of an assets reusing Breath of the Wild sequel in 2020 or 2021?
Most importantly, a certain, but for the most part overlooked tradition that has existed since the first Zelda sequel saw the light of day in 1987. The canon second quest of the same hero. It may not take place immediately after Ganon has been defeated, but it does take place, and we get to experience it as the same Link. In the cases of Zelda 1 and 2, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and A Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes, it happened through the same console. While in the case of A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, and The Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, it happened through first a console and then handheld experience. In fact, of all the console Zeldas, only 2 heroes have been denied a second adventure, the Hero of Twilight and the Hero of the Sky. And what do these 2 have in common? They had specific one-time purposes. The Hero of Twilight was to conclude the Hero of Time's quest of killing Ganondorf and satisfy the Hero of Time fanbase, while the Hero of the Sky's purpose was to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Zelda franchise with an original quest, and where Ganondorf or Ganon's reincarnations and resurrections would get an explanation through Demise's curse. This is why these 2 incarnations of the spirit of the hero never got second adventures, and broke with this tradition existing since the first console Zelda. Now with the Switch being a handheld and a console, a split between handheld and console Zelda experiences is no longer necessary. In other words, the cycle or convention that has been with us since 1992 has been lifted, and that the next Zelda game that would have naturally followed on a handheld will rather come out on the Nintendo Switch somewhere in the middle of the system's life cycle. In other words, sometime in 2020 or the first half of 2021.
The second thing to note from this is that if we are to get a mid-cycle Zelda title, then it's very likely to be another Hero of the Wild adventure. It's possible that we could get a sequel to Breath of the Wild, which perhaps takes place shortly after the events that unfolded there. A game that could be quite different because it might not even take place in Hyrule. We'll save the probably obvious inspiration for this to the end, but for now let's have a look at 2 specific examples, namely that of the Hero of Legend and the Hero of Winds. The Hero of Legend is the only Link to have ever defeated Ganon while he wielded the complete Triforce. And after an accomplishment like that, how'd you one-up it? The Zelda team opted to make Link set sail for a new adventure that would strand him on the Isle of Koholint, where he didn't face Ganon at all, with the exception of a nightmare. He then had 2 more adventures in Holodrum and Labrina, making him the only Link to be playable in more than 2 separate titles. However, the Oracle games were developed by Capcom and didn't come straight after Link's Awakening, but after Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. So for the sequel pattern we're looking at, we'll just include A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, which coincidentally is getting a full remake on Nintendo Switch. Could it be a hint of things to come? Or perhaps it's just similar to Wind Waker HD, which was pretty much the first stepping stone for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Speaking of, the Hero of Winds also had 2 adventures prior to reaching New Hyrule with Tetra. One in Hyrule against Ganondorf, and one outside of Hyrule where Ganondorf or Ganon don't appear, in the world of the Ocean King. Then again, Phantom Hourglass came after Twilight Princess, but this was likely the result of Twilight Princess being fan service from the development team after the initial backlash the Wind Waker faced due to its cel-shaded art style.
Though the Hero of Legend might be the ultimate Ganon crusher, the Hero of Time is the most influential for Zelda's lore and timeline. Just like with the Hero of Legend and the Hero of Winds, he had 2 adventures, one in Hyrule against Ganondorf, Ganon, and the other in Termina against Majora. And just like with Link's Awakening and Phantom Hourglass, Majora's Mask is another adventure with no Ganondorf or Ganon. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are the quintessential examples of a Zelda origin story, and direct sequel following it and done right. A title that reuses all of the assets of the original and then puts them into a completely different context, or setting. It states by itself that it would be a shame to put things to waste if they can serve once again prior to moving on to the next big thing. And the same is the case with Breath of the Wild. You don't spend 5 years working on an engine and game mechanics to never use them again. Plus, we need more Zelda and Link from the wild. After all, we only know the backstory, but nothing about what happened after the reunion 100 years after the Great Calamity. Also, shouldn't the cap, tunic and trousers of the wild get a chance to be used for a full adventure this time around? After all, the champions are gone, so no longer need for the blue, which was great for Breath of the Wild, which was supposed to be a different Zelda experience. But the green is the hero's color, and Link is now Princess Zelda's Hero of Hyrule, making it the perfect outfit for the true hero in his second true quest.
Yeah, Conrad, we're running out of time here, and we all see that this will turn into several episodes of our The Next Zelda series. But since we are already on the topic of Breath of the Wild, why don't we look at its connection to the original Legend of Zelda? Yes, in many ways, Breath of the Wild is a reimagining of the original Legend of Zelda. Zelda being trapped before we even begin our quest, Link being guided by an old man, Ganon being a giant monster without any expressions or intelligence, just pure rage. It's pretty much the same game, but with a different Hyrule, characters, and technology. Now, what if Nintendo decides that the best way to go after an impossible title to follow up is by expanding the world and giving us everything the original missed? That is pretty much what Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link did back in 1987, by expanding Hyrule physically and adding vibrant towns, experience points, and introducing a large number of brand new enemies and other main villains than Ganon. Breath of the Wild, similarly to Zelda 1, nailed the exploration, gave us a sophisticated, though limited number of enemies, and a pretty straightforward Ganon fight, with really only one true phase plus target practice. However, it failed in its story presentation, and unlike Zelda 1, also came short when it came to dungeon quality and boss design. So what should the next Zelda game do then? Take everything that was right about Breath of the Wild, and combine it with a deeper and radically different experience and setting. Just think about this for a second. Zelda 2, while coming out just a year after the original Zelda in 1987, greatly expanded the world, partially by reusing the original map from Zelda 1. It also introduced a number of new mechanics, such as towns, experience points, a large number of new enemies, and demonstrated that you can have another quest with the same hero without the presence of Ganon. The best way to see this is that Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 will never receive proper remakes, and the next best thing is to honor their legacy by using them as templates for a modern-day reimagination. We definitely saw this was the case with Breath of the Wild's structure being remarkably similar to Zelda 1. Now Nintendo stands with the great opportunity to create a sequel that will stand out and differ, but not necessarily completely disregard Ganon and Hyrule, which was the main premise of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link.
This way Nintendo can reuse Breath of the Wild's open-air Hyrule while expanding the map greatly to the north and west with a greater Hyrule, or perhaps new kingdoms that will be introduced to the franchise for the first time. The possibilities for a more ambitious title through expanding with the existing assets are endless. But it just stands as proof of how great an assets reusing Zelda could be if they decide to make it a reimagining of Zelda 2, just like Breath of the Wild was a reimagining of Zelda 1. But naturally, with a new and much more story-driven experience that will live up to Nintendo's claim of The Legend of Zelda being their storytelling series, and the only big one with the official timeline after this one took a backseat in Breath of the Wild, there are a few other more points that we need to bring up. And unfortunately we don't have time to analyze all of them right now, but we'll explore all of them instead in depth in future episodes. These are beyond the story of another Hero of the Wild open-air adventure, the importance of a mid-gen assets reusing Zelda title, and pushing a more powerful Nintendo Switch Pro, as recently reported by Wall Street Journal and supported then by Eurogamer.
Just like what is currently the case with different performance of the same games on PS4 Pro versus PS4 and Xbox One X and Xbox One. But as we said, these are topics for another day. For now, we want to thank Zeltic for joining us on this episode, and if you don't want to miss any of our upcoming episodes on the story and performance of this possible Breath of the Wild sequel, then like this video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm and press that notification bell for all notifications. Finally, we want to thank all our gracious patrons, and in particular, royal producers Kenyatta Ali and Bradley Carriage. You can join them too on patreon.com/commonrealm. Until the next one, this was Conrad, Joseph, and Zeltic, and we will see you next time on the Commonwealth Realm.